every platform has its own variation of it now. 15 years ago, it was a differentiator if you supported that. But if you roll those things in as a bundle, because you know that these are two things that are really the same thing, or a product group, depending on which tool you're working with, it uses different terminology. But then you deliver results. If it's a group, you deliver the results at the group level. Then you don't end up with duplicated rows.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our number one priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WBS Podcast. I'm Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at digital transformation consulting firm Elevate IQ. Everyone has their preferences of how they shop. This makes the job of e-commerce companies harder, as they can do so much to understand customer preferences and align them with their product catalog. But if you streamlined your guided navigation and personalization, it could also be a competitive advantage for companies. The more personalized experience you could provide to your customers, the higher their affinity will be with your brand. In today's episode, our guest Ben Rudnick shares his insights into how companies can increase their revenue by improving the findability and searchability of their product lines. He also discusses concepts such as exponential design and reindexing. Finally, he describes the process of how artificial intelligence can be used to assist with guided navigation and how that can improve the personalization for your e-commerce customers. Let me introduce Ben to you. During his 2+ decades of experience as a hands-on technical and strategy consultant in e-commerce findability, search, navigation, personalization, and natural language processing, Ben Rudnick has added billions in revenue lift to sites ranging from B2C giants like Amazon and Harbor Freight to B2B winners like United Nations and HD Supply Canada. Ben optimizes the buyer experience leveraging AI that analyzes buyer behavior and product catalog data to find opportunities for high ROI alignment. When Ben meets a process, a curve gets a hockey stick. With that, let's get to the conversation. Hey Ben, welcome to the show.
Hello, Sam. Thanks for having us.
Of course. Super excited to have you because the kind of work that you have done, especially with respect to findability and navigation, it's going to be so exciting for our listeners. Just to kick things off, do you want to start with your personal story and your current focus, Ben?
Sure. Well, my personal story is I was inspired by artificial intelligence and data mining as a kid, and in the 90s, I got started in that part of the industry and was at the beginning of one-to-one personalization for sites on the web around the turn of the millennium. And I always looked for synergies between technologies. And what I found was that a lot of the personalization sites I saw and was working with were having challenges with findability, search and navigation on their site. And it started to make me wonder, I can bring a 20 to 30+% revenue lift by giving you recommendations and other personalization. Is it possible to have the same kind of lift again by improving someone's ability to find what they're looking for on your site? So then I shifted and got into natural language processing and ended up driving the product direction for a natural language processing BI solution that was interested in applying their tool to the e-commerce world. And so I drove their product strategy for a number of years. And then when we got them to, the e-commerce world, I also left them with a roadmap for how to use artificial intelligence to further enhance their product and their ability to take care of their customers. And then what I did was, that was a roadmap for them for product, but I saw that so many of their customers, they bought a cool tool, but they weren't using it to nearly its fullest potential. So what I did was I built a couple of cool little AI tools that I could use my own self
Yeah.
And I work directly with the hundreds of clients for that search tool to optimize their site. And that's what I've been doing, and also with other search tools, because analyzing buyer behavior and then analyzing a catalog using AI on both to find areas of alignment has proven to be able to deliver an extra 20 to more percent. And when I work with somebody, I say I'll guarantee you'll get at least 5%. I don't even bother sending you a bill if you're not going to get more than 5%. I don't even send a bill. And I've never had that. Everybody's always really happy to send a bill, because I work with people who are selling, usually 50 million to 100 million or billions of dollars. And you can imagine, when you're getting 10 to 20% on top of that, you're excited to pay that bill.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure everybody is going to be excited about that. I mean, that's a big chunk of money. Who's not going to want that, right? And I can almost also guarantee that, the kind of, e-commerce site, the infrastructure that I have seen in the manufacturing distribution community, obviously that could utilize a lot of improvement, especially when it comes to personalization. I don't think the businesses and the digital infrastructure is really there with respect to the kind of potential that your personalization is going to offer. So we are going to drill into all of that. But before we do that, we have one of these standard questions that we ask every single guest, man. And that is going to be your perspective on business growth.
Well, there's always room for growth, right? We've spoken before. I'm a big fan of exponential business models. Exponential organizations, you can read their books and, hire their consultants if you like. And basically it's, doing more with less, right? It's all, there's just so much room for improvement. And, you don't need to just shift gears to a different platform, because that's what maybe going to give you linear improvement. If you find an opportunity to tune up what you've already got, you can have immediate improvement without, the cost of simply waiting for some new system to be implemented, right? That has a huge opportunity cost.
Okay, amazing insights there. So now we are going to be drilling a little bit into the story that you are going to share, and that is going to paint a real picture for our audience in terms of whether they can utilize that 5%, 10% revenue lift, unless we have the real context in terms of, where the business was, what kind of improvement that you have done. Unless we can provide these specific details, it's going to be very hard for our listeners to follow. So do you want to start a little bit, about the business model, the kind of, catalog they had, how many warehouses, how many sites are we talking about? So how many different customer channels? So provide a little bit of context of the business, and then we will drill down into the story and find out, how we can improve the findability and the navigation on that.
Sure. Well, the site that I've recently wrapped up a significant project with that you've seen and has had great results.
Yeah.
You asked me to speak about is HD Supply.
Okay.
And their Canadian division. They have a U.S. division and a Canadian division, and I focused on the Canadian division because it's a different business.
Yeah.
And they had challenges with people finding what they were looking for, right?
Okay.
If you searched supply lines, their search engine wasn't tuned up. And it was finding things that said supply and things that said line.
Yeah.
But in some cases, instead of showing the thing that connects your toilet to the wall, it was giving you, a Roto-Rooter and all sorts of other cool plumbing stuff.
Yeah.
And all sorts of other stuff that wasn't even in plumbing, right? It had the word supply and it had the word lines in it.
Yeah.
So between that, challenges with search as well, they had challenges with navigation because their navigation had grown organically over time as the catalog grew, right?
Yeah.
Their ERP is where the navigation came from.
Yeah.
And that had 10 years to just grow bit by bit.
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of a mobile first perspective.
Yeah.
And so with mobile first, one of the things that's kind of a magic number is the number 12.
Yeah.
Because when you're dealing with different display sizes, if you have something that's 4 columns wide and 3 rows deep, that works well. If you shrink it down to 3 columns, it's now 4 rows deep. If you shrink it down to 2 columns, it's now 6.
Yeah.
And 1, it's just a string of 12, right?
Yeah.
And so that is also a good guidance for navigation, that if you have more than 12 navigational elements, not only it doesn't necessarily fit well in a mobile experience, it also creates analysis paralysis for the buyer.
Yep.
There's just too many options.
Yep.
So, for example, in plumbing, they had over 30 subcategories. Once you clicked on plumbing, there were over 30 different options, and of course, options below those. And that was there was inconsistency. There was some stuff that could have been in more than one place, but it was only in one place. There's stuff that was in the wrong place because it was just over time, and they had thousands and thousands of items. It was difficult to manage. So I distilled that 30 list down to 5.
Okay.
That was an intuitive list based on how you were using it, right? Okay. Is it a kitchen item? Is it a bathroom item?
Okay.
Is it a tool or equipment, right? Is it pipe and fittings, right? You get the idea, like bigger groups. And then under bathroom and kitchen, there's going to be a lot of stuff that's duplicated, right? Yeah. But if I'm looking for plumbing for my bathroom, it only showed the stuff that was good for my bathroom. Right. And if you're looking for plumbing for my kitchen, it only showed you the stuff you'd want for my kitchen, right? Yeah. So that's kind of the principle of guided navigation. You're guiding the shopper to purchase, which the net result is fewer clicks to get to the item you're looking for.
Yeah.
But also, you don't have to go hunting through 30 subcategories of plumbing to figure out which is the right one, right? You're like, which one is it? And when you click in and use the site and it's inconsistent, you're not sure if you're seeing anything. It reduces shopper or buyer confidence, right? Yeah. So by giving people a consistent result, and the nice thing was the way I set up things is so that as much as possible, the assignment of where it is done dynamically, treating this new navigation as attributes.
Okay.
And so that's kind of nice because you have the faceted navigation, right? You usually have a hard-coded kind of this is in this category slot. Yeah. But then we created a parallel navigation using their attribute capability.
Okay.
And then the nice thing there is we can tweak it, right? It's not set in stone. And then once they're really happy with it, I can export that so it gets re-uploaded and everything gets, re-indexed by the ERP and everything under these new optimized categories. So it makes it really smooth and easy to maintain. That's another piece of exponential design is you want to make it so that it doesn't create more work for you. You want less work.
Okay, so very interesting. So obviously we are going to build on this so that our listeners are able to follow along. So you mentioned a couple of terms, for example, re-indexing. But before we do that, we are going to take one step further and we are going to talk about the overarching system landscape, which system is storing the data, where the data is coming from, where the indexing is happening, how are these SKUs structured, how many different SKUs are we talking about, how many systems are there, do we have ERP plus PIM that is actually sourcing the data? So do you want to talk first about the overarching business model? And I know that you had also mentioned that, US and Canadian entities completely separate. Are they separate, legally? Do they share any sort of product, customer, vendors, or do they not share anything? So do you want to talk first about the business model and then we'll keep building on that?
Sure. Well, the businesses are separate entities because, it just makes a lot more sense because, they've got lots of customers in the US, they've got lots of customers in Canada, and being a B2B distributor, they have a broad spectrum catalog. They sell plumbing, they sell electrical, but they also sell, janitorial supplies and towels for hotels, right? Yeah. They sell key cards and door hangers and light fixtures. So what is for sale in Canada is not always the same as what's for sale in the U.S. So right. They keep them as separate businesses. And they have a cloud-based ERP, and they have a on-premises e-commerce solution. So those need to talk to each other.
Okay.
The e-commerce solution, it's a little fun because some of the product information management is kept at the ERP level. That's funneled into the e-commerce solution. And then there's added product information management that happens in the e-commerce level in this particular case. And then that's indexed by the e-commerce system. And I work within the tools available within the e-commerce system. I work within whatever tools any of my clients have, because the methods I work with are at a logical level, right? There's a methodology.
Yeah.
And then I have my own AI tools that study buyer behavior and then look into the terms that are available for use within the items.
Yeah.
And I find opportunities for alignment.
Okay, very interesting. So obviously, we need to dig a little deeper overall in terms of the SKU strategy. So I know that you have the ERP, you have the e-commerce, and we right now don't know how many different SKUs are there, and if you mentioned that ERP is probably going to be the source for the product data, but then the product information is really kept at the e-commerce level. When you talk about the indexing and when you talk about the dynamic indexing, describe a little bit more how the indexing is constructed. Is it going to be an attribute at the product level, or is this information going to be kept inside ERP and then ERP is actually sending to e-commerce? So describe that a little bit more.
Sure. Well, the system that they have, and many systems have this ability where the e-commerce tool has the ability to not only store attributes that are specifically assigned in the e-commerce system. The attributes or facets, if you will, are not stored at the ERP level. But they also, most tools have the ability for you to effectively derive the attributes based off of like a product search or some other criteria. Right. And so that is where I am able to really make something shine, because by analyzing what the product data is, I create these rules. And that means that when you have new products, you don't have to tag them perfectly yourself. Each product as they come in, the system automatically discovers them based on those rules. So that's part of reducing the maintenance. So when it's possible within somebody's system, I do that. When it's not possible, I generate the tags using my own tools and then give them something they can just import. Okay. But I use that mechanism of effectively a discovery rule that gets applied to figure out, what facets apply to a given item. And using this, I've worked with clients with millions of items. This particular client only has 10,000 items.
Yeah.
But, the neat thing is, it's actually not much more complicated working with somebody with millions of items versus 10,000 items, because they usually actually have the same scale of navigation that's required.
Yeah.
Somebody with millions of items usually just has more variations of that item, right? They might sell lots more ladders, but their ladders are still either extension ladders or step ladders, and they might be fiberglass or aluminum, and they might be, 6 foot or 8 foot.
Yeah.
Right? But they might just have more options, right?
Yeah.
Then next thing you know, you have more brands to choose from. So it's not actually a big difference for me to make an impact on either scale of catalog. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. In fact, we are going to build further on that. Obviously, I want to make sure the listeners are able to follow along, whatever you are trying to describe. So here, obviously, you mentioned that you are going to have the dynamic navigation. You are looking at the buyer's behavior, their search pattern. So I don't know if you are going to be looking at some of the data from the paid advertising, or are you simply looking at the Google Search Console data and the tool that you mentioned that you are trying to utilize to be able to create the dynamic navigation, the dynamic attribute? Is that the commercial tool? Is that known tool? Is that proprietary that you have built? So tell us a little bit more about how the process is going to be. Which are the data sources that you are going to be utilizing, and how does the process work for the dynamic indexing generation that you described?
Yeah, well, so I focus on usually the data that's available to the shopper or buyer on the website.
Okay.
So I start with that. And as far as analytics, I start with the buyer analytics that's available, either within the platform. There'll be, sometimes even raw logs. And if I can get directly with SQL to raw log data, I go for that because I'm a data geek.
Yeah.
But I've worked off of Google Analytics level data. And I also incorporate insight from the business level, which is usually brings in things like your search engine marketing keywords used and things that you see as far as referral strings coming from Google.
Yeah.
But also the business level data of which categories are important to you, right? So we start off with kind of a walk before you run approach.
Yeah.
Where at first I look at the overall system and I look at your description of what's important to your business.
Yeah.
And we find a few low-hanging fruit opportunities, things that are specific pain points to your organization, things that are going to be easy to make a big difference on, and things are also going to have global impact, right? For example, most every search engine now has a concept of relevance that's tied to which type of data you're matching on, right? How relevant is a match on the category name versus the product description versus the product name, right? And tuning that, it's at one site to the other is not always the same. So adjusting that so that it makes the best use of your data, and by looking at the buyer behavior, I understand the buyer's intent.
Yeah.
So we align those things. The tools that I use are my own constantly evolving proprietary AI, but the methodology behind it, the why and kind of the how, I share all the time with people like yourself. I mean, that's easy, right?
Okay, amazing. So
you don't need the tools to be successful, right? You don't need my tools to find success. My tools just make it so that literally within the first week, they had lots of changes that were visible.
Yeah.
And a week later, they were able to measure them, right? The speed to delivery is a little faster because I'm using a machine to do the learning.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And, in the spirit of walk before you run, we do that just a little bit, and then people are excited. And then we tackled plumbing as a whole category. And then people, were really excited. And then we started working our way through the catalog. And based on the effort of going through about halfway through the catalog, in one quarter, they were up about 13% in their business online. And now that we've completed the whole catalog, by the end of Q1 2022, they'll have results. And I think comfortably they'll be at 20% or maybe even 30% revenue lift off the work that I did. So it's the power is there. Anybody can do it, but you need to have foundations in the best practices of guided navigation. And you need to have the openness to actually look into the data and listen to the shoppers and buyers, so you know what their intention is, right?
Yeah, so let's do a little walkthrough of the original scenario that you had mentioned when you started this episode. So you mentioned that, if I'm looking for the supply line, I am entering those keywords in my search engine on site, on the website, and then I am getting a bunch of irrelevant search results. For example, let's say if I'm looking for my bathroom, but I am actually getting results for kitchen, which does not make any sense.
Yeah.
And the reason why that was happening is because you had sort of these static attributes that were correlated with your products, and it was very hard. So you have supply this product, line, supply this product. Now you have those two keywords. That's a challenge, right? So in your case, you are trying to generate this map dynamically. So walk us through, let's say, if as a user, I am entering supply line, how the search results are going to be more specific. So walk us through the algorithm, how the map is going to look after you have done all your magic from the AI tools, how the navigation is going to be different, how the indexing is going to be different. And when the user is going to input the supply and line in the search engine, what are the results that I should be able to see as a user?
Well, part of how I work in this regard is that, since the navigation, right, the attribute faceted navigation was an important piece here that needed a lot of help.
Yeah.
Is I like to build the concepts from the bottom up. So instead of going into the system and, in any search system, you could say, hey, supply lines is something that's worth me tuning up. So I'm going to go in and say supply lines means it says supply lines, or it says this and that, and it's in the plumbing category, and you kind of build a rule around that, right, at the top. That's how a lot of people start. But that's not my method for doing both the navigation and the search at the same time in a way that's self-maintaining. My method is to say, okay, well, if you need a navigation for supply line materials, and you need a navigation for the supply line length, right? And you need a navigation for the supply line use, right? Is it a dishwasher supply or a toilet supply? And you need a navigation for, in this case, also I added the connections, right? What are the two ends? What are they attached? What's the threading and what type of fitting is on each end?
Yeah.
So if you needed all that navigation and you needed to create the discovery rules for each of those pieces, instead of starting at the top, let's start at the bottom. Let's figure out, what's a toilet supply line? What's a dishwasher supply line? How do we discover that just by using the words available in the product descriptions?
Yeah.
Okay. And then we assemble those into what a supply line is, right? If something is discovered to be a toilet supply line or a dishwasher supply line or a faucet supply line, well, then it's the supply line.
Yeah.
right? So we bring all of those into that supply line definition, and that's part of what makes it self-maintaining.
Very interesting. So is it fair to say that, let's say, if you are going to have any sort of SKU scheme, it is not really going to have any sort of impact because how your SKUs are going to be structured? Because from our experience, when we work with these businesses, their SKUs could be all over the place. And sometimes you might even have the duplicate SKUs for the same product. So does the SKU number or the way the products are really structured, would that have any implications on how these dynamic rules are going to work for navigation as well as searchability?
Not in my case. And when people have duplicated SKUs, right? I've worked with lots of clients where maybe they have multiple source vendors for the same SKU, right? And most search engines have this concept of effectively, a SKU processing, where this item, is part of this group of items, right? Like in Magento, it's a product bundle, right? There's a bundle. There's every platform has its own variation of it now. 15 years ago, it was a differentiator if you supported that. But if you roll those things in as a bundle, because that these are two things that are really the same thing, right? Or a product group, depending on which tool you're working with, it uses different terminology. But then you deliver results. If it's a group, you deliver the results at the group level, then you don't end up with duplicated rows, right? And that's an important thing from a shopper usability, because if you've got 5 different versions of exactly the same product, you're wasting screen real estate by showing the same image 5 times.
Yeah. Very interesting. So now when you were working with this business, initially, I don't know if everything was aligned to your expectation. When you did this over the period of time, let's say you did the navigation once, and then you discovered that, I need to build on top of that because this was not the original assumption I had. So I don't know if you have had any sort of surprises during this journey that was not something that you knew based on your prior engagement. Do you have any sort of stories that you might be able to share that were really shocking for either this specific business or this specific engagement or the industry or the company?
Well, at this point, I've been doing this search for, about 15 years. It's generally hard to surprise me. I've worked with lots of different businesses. And so, for example, if I know something's going to be ambiguous, right? If you're looking for a receptacle, you might be looking for an electrical receptacle or a trash receptacle.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I see that ahead of time. But also part of my process, when somebody asks me to go all the way through a catalog, right? If you just wanted me to focus on plumbing, I focus on plumbing. I make that awesome. But I also, with my experience, I'm able to make sure that I don't miss up other things, right? But also part of my process is, for example, if I'm going to tune up a given search term, I look through the logs of all the searches that contains that search term. And so that way, when I search for all the searches that contain receptacle, I see that it's trash receptacle, recycling receptacle, electrical receptacle, right? I see that in the log of all the different things people search. So that's also part of making sure you don't get bitten later.
Yeah.
But you totally are right. Eventually, you'll find things you'll always find something that is an outlier, right? You use the word expectation, and I'm a bit of a philosopher, and I have a fun saying, expectation is the grandmother of disappointment.
Yeah.
Because if you have expectation, you will end up with missed expectation, which will give you disappointment. And so in that regard, I am not surprised when there are outliers. And also I'm careful to look for them, right? If you have an electrician come into your house and you want them to install an outlet there, and they don't check for whether or not there's a stud right behind the spot where you want to install it, they might be drilling 2 holes, right? Now you got a big extra hole in your wall because they thought they were going to put it in one spot and there's a stud in the wall, right? So it's important to be considerate of what you're doing could affect something else.
Yeah.
And that kind of speaks to an overall bit of advice that's really good for everybody is that you don't know what you don't know. And so if you really want to make a difference, it is really inexpensive money for you to find somebody who has experience doing this stuff and have them come in, either hire them for a year or two to make things awesome, or have a consultant come in like me. I can make things awesome in a few months or even a few weeks, depending on, what the project is. And then, you get trained on how to maintain it, right? So you get started on the right footing. And because that's what I see all the time. I see people who, they had expectation, and then they had missed expectation and disappointment because they thought that, for example, like they might have thought that they need to clean up all their product data first. And they spend a year and a half going through their entire catalog and think, okay, it's perfect. Now we're going to upload it and everything's going to be fixed. It's not. Okay. You need to tune up the search engine in order to get good search. Just fixing the product data doesn't actually fix it. And in fact, the way that I work with all the dirty data, because then I build rules that's tolerant of the dirty data. Because the way somebody is going to mess up the data today, even if you went through and fixed all the data, the next day somebody's going to put more dirty data in.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. As soon as you're done with your cleanup project, somebody is going to do it wrong the next day afterwards. So if you make the system so that it's tolerant of, for example, you might call it an outlet or a receptacle if it's, an electrical outlet, right? You make the system able to handle that. So, I see people who, as you to your point of missed expectations, you'll have a new platform vendor say, oh, you had these problems, you plug my thing in, it'll work great. I get that call all the time. Somebody I worked with 2 years ago, they plugged in a new platform, they said it would work great, they gave me a year to fix it, they didn't fix it. So now it's fun. I get to take the exact same logic I used before and just apply it into a new search system. And now it works great.
Okay, amazing. So when you work with these businesses, have you found any specific limitations of any of the platforms? For example, let's say, obviously you have many different platforms. They have their own capabilities. You go across the board, you have Shopify, you have BigCommerce, you have Magento. They all have the way they store their, product category data. They all have their own structure, the way they structure the other data elements that are going to be dependent upon product, and that search is going to be dependent upon. So when you work across these platforms, have you come across any limitations that may be specific to the platform that you might be able to share with our listeners?
Sure. Well, every platform has, kind of their own box that you work within. So most platforms nowadays start off with something based off of the Apache Lucene stack for search, which is the base underneath both Solr and Elasticsearch. And so they usually use those because Solr came out first and has, the ability to do easier guided navigation, right? Attributes and facets. And then Elastic has that plus some other fun stuff. But when it's within a platform, sometimes they give you lots of access to the Solr or Elastic tuning capabilities. Sometimes they give you very little.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't like to speak negatively of any platform, certainly not in such a public forum. But when I find limitations, I grew up a technologist, so even though I work with business and really it's about business goals and it's about, if the KPI doesn't have a dollar sign after it, nobody really cares, right? I can talk about conversion rate and average order value, but really you guys care about what's the revenue lift, right? And they do contribute and they actually multiply in order to give you revenue lift. But really what matters at the end is the bottom line. So, for example, sometimes I bump into something where there's really not a lot of transparency. There's not a lot of access to the search engine. It's really, you got to put the data in the way the system wants the data imported.
Yeah.
And that's your only option. And in that case, and sometimes they don't even let you get the data out very easily. Right?
Yeah.
And I don't raise my hands and say, oops, I can't help. Right? I just write a little screen scraper to literally collect all the data from your site. I can gather all the data from your website really quickly, put it into my own data structure, and then I can massage that data so that, in the worst case scenario where you have no control over the system, I massage that data. So, and the nice thing is when I go through that, not only does the search and the navigation now work much better, but the output includes a massaged version of the product description. So you end up with actually a better display across your whole site. It's in some ways, it's a little bit more work when you have, your hands handcuffed to a system that doesn't give you the access. But in some ways, you may actually end up with a better total net result because you've now re-uploaded all your product data and better, right? It's pretty rare for you to have no access nowadays. Not many systems are that close.
Okay, very interesting. So since you mentioned that lots of access and no access, I don't know if you're able to describe a little bit more to put the context. How can they find out whether they are going to have lots of access versus no access when they are looking at the platform? Because anybody who is choosing a platform, they need to make a determination whether that platform is going to be fit for them, and they don't know what underpinnings they should be looking at. Once they start using the system, then only they are going to come to know, okay, now I have this limitation. What do I do now? Am I going to be changing the platform or whatever, right? So let's say if somebody is deciding that, okay, from the get-go, can I find the platform that is not probably going to have these limitations so that we don't have to actually create this ad hoc process of scraping and then finding data from there? So can you provide a little bit more context into how to find out whether they are going to have no access versus lots of access across these platforms?
Yeah, I'm happy to. And it's actually very concise because I've been invited to do entire breakout sessions at conferences on platform selection and things like that. And I've helped lots of people with that. And it comes down to a very simple difference. When you're asking for requirements and you're doing your RFI, RFP, etc., you don't ask, can you do this? You don't want checkboxes.
Yep.
You want answers. How do you do this?
Yeah.
Okay. So when you ask somebody, how do I create synonyms in my search system? How do I create guided navigation? Not, can you create guided navigation?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So when you ask the how, the platform vendor or the search vendor has to show you how. And then you get to see how easy is it? What do you actually have control over? Because everybody's going to check as many boxes to say yes as possible.
Yeah.
Right? If you give them a checkbox. But if they actually have to answer the question, you'll be able to compare that, one's apples, one's oranges, and the other's pizza.
Yep.
Right? And they all feed you, but not always the same. So yeah, the simple difference is don't ask, can you do it?
Yeah.
Ask, how do you do it?
Okay, so let's take an example here. So let's say if you're asking any of the vendors where they are saying that, this is how I create my synonyms. And I don't know if there is going to be a bad way of doing the synonyms versus good way of doing the synonyms. So are you able to provide any sort of examples? Okay, this is really terrible way of doing the synonyms because actually that's not going to help with your search results. So tell us a bad example of creating the synonyms versus the good example of doing the synonyms.
Well, I've seen a platform which gives you very little access to the search system, and the only way to include synonyms is actually a text file that says this word equals that word.
Okay.
And it's got 2 columns of text data, tab delimited, and you upload that. And that's the only access you have to say that when somebody searches on this, they get that.
Yeah.
And in some cases, there's even limitations where you can't have one word mapped to more than one word, right? They have weird limitations sometimes. So that's a bad way to do it.
Yep.
Right. And then a good way to do it is if you have something with advanced natural language processing built into it.
Okay.
Sometimes you can just check a box that says include the synonyms from this dictionary, and they might have a bunch of different domains of dictionaries, right? Here's an electrical products dictionary. Here's a general dictionary. Here's and they might have different languages of dictionaries.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's awesome. Sometimes it's not so great because if you check the box for a whole language, like check the English box, and you sell specific technical products, the English language synonyms might be distracting and not necessarily deliver the best results, right? So there's definitely shortcuts, right, that can be taken. And of course, a natural language system is going to involve usually stemming. So it means that you don't have to create synonyms for things like plurals and other forms of tenses, right? But just like AI is a buzzword, right? 20 years ago, AI was a thing. And if you were into AI, you knew you were looking for that kind of AI or that kind of AI. Now everything's AI. Well, what is AI is really the question, right? How is AI used in your specific case? Well, the same thing goes for natural language. I remember having a meeting with Google to talk about natural language. At this point, I think it was about 12 years ago.
Yeah.
And they said, we've looked at it. We decided we don't need it. And then Bing came along, which was built on a natural language engine. And it didn't take long for Google to create its concept analysis. And now people think Google's a natural language engine, right?
Yeah.
So now most e-commerce search engines that are plugged into a system claim to have some level of natural language capability. They don't always match up the same, right? Some can handle things like price comparisons, right? I'm looking for a red jacket between $50 and $80, right? Some would then search for the word between instead of recognize that that's a price constraint.
Yeah.
So not all natural language is created equal, but natural language systems can often reduce your need to have synonyms, right?
Very interesting. So that's it for today, Ben. Do you have any last minute closing thoughts or remarks for our listeners?
Yeah, as I said a little bit earlier, if you have problems with people trying to find what they're looking for on your site, find somebody who is a proven expert at doing this, somebody with experience, either somebody within your platform or not, just somebody who works with any platform like myself, and get them to give you a foundation. Even if they only work with a subset of your product, like one category, you can then take the methodology that they teach you as part of the process and expand that. So it's trying to train somebody to send them off to training on how to use a tool. They're not going to be an expert at search, and they're not going to be an expert at that tool, right? So start off with a good foundation with good help, and don't fall into the trap of somebody telling you need to rework all your product data first because it's your product data's fault. It's not the search engine's fault. Don't listen to that. And don't listen to somebody who says you need to switch platforms entirely because it's the platform's fault. It's not the search engine's fault. It's your product data. Because a big part of that, why not to do that, is time to market. Because you're going to take weeks, months to replace a search engine. You're going to take months or years to replace the platform or rework all the product data. And that's a huge opportunity cost that's lost. If you're selling $100 million and you could bring somebody like me in to add 10%, that's $10 million you just brought in the first year. Even if you're going to throw that platform out next year, you still made $10 million. And my fees are nowhere near $10 million, right? I'm just happy to live on the side of a ski mountain. Right. You guys are a great team to work with. But yeah, save your listeners the pain and the expense of thinking they need to rip everything out and put something else in because a sales rep told them it was going to fix it, because it's not. You need somebody who's going to actually know the best practices to take care of aligning the buyer intent with the data that you have.
Okay, amazing. And my personal takeaway from this conversation is going to be, if you are really not getting results from e-commerce, there are many different issues that could happen with your e-commerce journey. And obviously, one of the most important one is going to be your searchability and findability. If people cannot really find the products with fewer clicks, they are going to get frustrated and they are probably not going to do business with you. On that note, Ben, I really want to thank you for your time. This has been a fascinating episode.
Thank you very much, Sam. I hope you have a beautiful day.
Okay, you too. I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show, for sharing their knowledge and journey. I always pick up learnings from our guests, and hopefully you learned something new today. If you want to learn more about Ben, head over to fun-hat.com. It's fun-hat.com. You can also send him a note via info@fun-hat.com to help your buyers find the right products easily. Links and more information will also be available in the show notes. If anything in this podcast resonated with you and your business, you might want to check other related episodes, including the interview with Steve Rice, who discusses why congruence is the most important factor to optimize product category architecture, navigation, user experience, customer journeys, and campaign design. Also, the interview with Dave Meyer from Busy Web, who describes how marketing automation works and why that is important to understand customer journeys. Also, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word among folks with similar backgrounds. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please review and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform or DM me on any social channels. I'll try my best to respond personally and make sure you get help. Thank you, and I hope to catch you on the next episode of the WBS Podcast.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.